The Real Story of Taylor Swift, Heartbreak, Hate, and the Reinvention of a Pop Icon, Segment 1. The Disappearance, Reputation, Rejection, and Rebirth. She vanished. For over a year, Taylor Swift, the once inseparable pop star with a face on every billboard, went quiet. No interviews, no red carpets, no cryptic Instagram posts, just silence. To the outside world, it looked like she had disappeared. To some, it looked like she was hiding. To others, it looked like she was finished. But in truth, Taylor Swift wasn't hiding. She was watching, and she was planning her return, not just as a singer, but as someone completely different. Because 2016 didn't just mark a break in her career, it marked a war on her identity. Just a year earlier, Taylor was riding one of the highest waves of her life. Her album 1989 had broken records, redefined her genre, and made her the face of a new kind of pop, polished, powerful, and personal. She had just won the Grammy for Album of the Year, again. She was performing in front of sold out stadiums. She had friendships with the most famous people on earth. And online, she was nearly untouchable, idolized, praised, protected. But the higher you rise, the sharper the fall. In the summer of 2016, everything changed. It started with a phone call. Kanye West released a song called Famous, in which he claimed credit for Taylor's success and used a lyric about her that many found degrading. When Taylor's team pushed back, Kanye's wife, Kim Kardashian, responded with a video clip, a single edited clip from a phone call without full context, but enough to imply that Taylor had approved the lyric. The internet exploded. Suddenly, she wasn't America's sweetheart anymore. She was a liar, a snake, a manipulator. The hashtag trended, Dockers Taylor Swift Ice Over Party. It wasn't a meme. It was a global takedown. People weren't just criticizing her, they were celebrating her downfall. Celebrities posted snake emojis, comment sections filled with venom. Think pieces accused her of being fake, calculated, untrustworthy. And Taylor, who had built her entire career on being vulnerable and connected to fans, fell silent. For the first time in a decade, the girl who had always had something to say said nothing. And the world noticed. It was in that silence that the myth began to shift. Taylor Swift wasn't just taking a break. She was being erased. Media called her a relic of old pop. Too polished, too nice, too careful, too planned. Some said she was out of touch. Some said she had been exposed. Some said she would never come back from this. And for a while, maybe even she believed it because it wasn't just public image that took the hit. Privately, Taylor was spiraling. She was battling anxiety, trust issues, depression, paranoia. Every time she opened her phone, she saw people cheering for her to fail, people she had never met, people who had once sung her lyrics, now branding her a villain. And perhaps worst of all, she couldn't respond because anything she said, anything, would be spun, mocked, torn apart. So instead, she disappeared. She deleted everything from her Instagram. She stopped tweeting. She stopped showing up. She vanished from the world that had once loved her most. And behind closed doors, she began to reinvent. What happens when a pop star decides to burn it all down? when she stops trying to please everyone and instead focuses on the one person she forgot to protect, herself. That was the start of Reputation, an album built not for radio, not for charts, not for awards, but for redemption. It wasn't sparkly, it wasn't sweet. It didn't smile for the camera, it was cold, it was bold. It was a razor blade hidden in a pop beat. And when it arrived in 2017, it made one thing clear. Taylor Swift was no longer here to be nice. She was here to take back control. Gone were the girlish curls and sundresses. Gone were the public friendships, the carefully crafted interviews, the image of the flawless girl next door in their place. Black, snakes, smoke, revenge. The lead single, Look What You Made Me Do, wasn't just a song, it was a warning. And in the music video, Taylor made it literal. She stood in a graveyard burying the old Taylor. She lined up every version of herself, from music videos to award shows, and had them fight to the death. And she stared into the camera with a knowing smile. It was theatrical. It was angry. It was brilliant. Because Taylor understood something few artists ever do. You can either run from your reputation or own it. And in doing so, she didn't just reclaim her narrative, she flipped the entire industry on its head. Reputation debuted at number one. It became one of the best selling albums of the year without any traditional press. She didn't give interviews. She didn't ask for approval. She didn't even try to explain herself. Instead, she let the music speak. And when the Reputation Stadium tour launched, it became the highest grossing US tour in history at the time. She had taken a moment of total public rejection and turned it into her most powerful rebirth. But this wasn't just a comeback, it was a reckoning. Taylor wasn't simply changing her music, she was changing the rules. She took ownership of her branding. She built new management structures. She scrutinized contracts. She took legal control of her image. And most importantly, she stopped apologizing. Because the girl who had once said sorry just for speaking up had become a woman who refused to be quiet. And in doing so, she laid the foundation for something even greater, a new era. As the reputation cycle came to an end, Taylor didn't bask in victory. She pivoted again, releasing Lover, a bright, emotional, love filled contrast to Reputation's shadows. It was a reminder she wasn't just strong, she was still hopeful, still vulnerable, still in love with storytelling, and slowly the public began to shift again. Not because she changed back, but because she stood her ground, because she survived the storm. She wore the scars, and she came out sharper, smarter, stronger. This was the turning point. The moment Taylor Swift stopped being just a pop star and started becoming a legend. Not for her hits, not for her sales, but for her resilience. Because while the world tried to tear her down, she built something even they couldn't touch, a legacy. Segment 2, The Girl from Pennsylvania, Early Years, Big Dreams. Before the awards, before the stadium tours, before the reinventions, the heartbreaks, and the headlines. There was a little girl on a Christmas tree farm in Pennsylvania. Her name was Taylor Allison Swift. And long before she became one of the most influential artists in modern music, she was just a child with an imagination that didn't fit in small spaces. She wasn't just singing along to the radio, she was building worlds, writing songs, acting out scenes, turning every quiet afternoon into a stage. This is where it began, on a quiet stretch of countryside, with snow covered pines and a mind that never stopped dreaming. Taylor was born on December 13th, 1989, in Reading, Pennsylvania. Her family lived on a farm in nearby Wyoming, surrounded by animals, open land, and trees lit up in December with strings of lights. But even as a child, Taylor felt pulled somewhere else. While her friends played tag and rode bikes, she was listening to country CDs, Faith Hill, Shania Twain, Dixie Chicks, and memorizing every lyric. She wasn't just a fan, she was a student. At night, she would sit in her room with a notebook and make lists of song titles. She'd study how choruses repeated. She'd write her own lyrics even before she could play a single instrument. By age 7, she was performing in school plays. By 9, she was singing at fairs and festivals. By 10, she was sending demo CDs to record labels in Nashville. Most kids that age were writing spelling words. Taylor was writing songs. It wasn't easy. She was different. While other kids were out socializing, Taylor was laser focused on music, and kids noticed that kind of difference. At school, she didn't always fit in. She felt awkward, out of sync, too ambitious, too sensitive. The very traits that would later define her success, her intensity, her imagination, her emotional honesty, made her a target. She was teased, isolated, dismissed. But instead of shutting down, Taylor turned inward. She wrote more. She practiced harder. And she poured everything, every slight, every heartbreak, every lonely moment into the songs. I would come home and write about it, she later said. I turned all of those emotions into lyrics because that was the only way I could make sense of it. It wasn't therapy, it was transformation. By the time she was 11, Taylor had convinced her parents to take a trip to Nashville, the heart of country music. She walked into record labels with her demo CD in hand, confident, determined, and entirely unknown. Most doors closed. Most executives said the same thing: come back when you're older. But that didn't break her, it motivated her. Because Taylor wasn't looking for permission, she was looking for opportunity. And when Nashville didn't open its arms, she doubled down. Back in Pennsylvania, Taylor took matters into her own hands. She started learning guitar from a local repairman who showed her just 3 chords. That was all she needed. Within a week, she had written her first complete song. Within a year, she had dozens. And they weren't childish. They weren't generic. They were honest. Her lyrics captured feelings that were deeply personal but universally understood. And that was Taylor's first true superpower. She made small emotions feel big and big emotions feel close. It didn't take long for others to notice. Taylor began playing local shows and entering talent contests. She performed at festivals, rodeos, mall events, anywhere that would let her sing. Her parents supported her every step of the way. But when they realized her talent wasn't a phase, they made a life changing decision. They moved from rural Pennsylvania to Nashville, Tennessee. They left their home, their land, their routines, so their teenage daughter could chase a dream. It was a leap of faith. But for Taylor, it was a signal. If they believe in me that much, she thought, I can't let them down. In Nashville, she stood out instantly, not because she looked like a star, but because she worked like one. At just 13 years old, she became the youngest artist ever signed by Sony ATV as a staff songwriter. While most kids her age were in eighth grade English, she was in writing rooms with grown men twice her age, holding her own one lyric at a time. But she didn't want to just write for others. She wanted the mic. She wanted the stage. She wanted to tell her own stories. And she didn't want to wait. That chance came with the new, then unknown label, Big Machine Records. At age 15, Taylor signed a deal that would change her life. And she did it with one condition: she would write every song herself. In an industry where teenage girls were often handed producers and ghostwriters, Taylor demanded authorship. She wanted control, she wanted ownership, she wanted truth because she, these weren't just songs to her, they were her journal. And when her debut single, Tim McGraw, hit country radio in 2006, people felt that truth immediately. It was nostalgic, romantic, melancholic, mature beyond her years. She wasn't just another pretty face singing someone else's words. She was telling the truth, and the truth resonated. Her self titled debut album followed. It wasn't an instant explosion, it was a slow build. But week by week, fan by fan, show by show, Taylor Swift was becoming a name people remembered. Her songs were about real things: getting your heart broken at school, being invisible in a crowd, watching someone you love walk away, and fans, especially teenage girls, saw themselves in her. She didn't talk down to them. She didn't fake cool. She didn't chase trends. She just told the truth with a guitar and a glitter pen. And in doing so, she became something rare: a young artist with an authentic voice in an industry full of noise. By 17, Taylor had a gold record. By 18, she was a Grammy nominee. By 19, she had become a full blown phenomenon. But all of that started here, on a Christmas tree farm, with a notebook, a beat up guitar, and a girl who believed that if you wrote your truth loud enough, someone out there would hear it. And they did. They heard it on the radio, in arenas, on earbuds across the world. They heard their own pain, their own crushes, their own heartbreaks reflected back to them in every chorus. That was Taylor Swift's first act, and it was only the beginning. Segment 3: Fearless, from country starlet to global phenomenon. She had the curls, the boots, the big smile. She was still just a teenager. But by 2008, Taylor Swift was no longer just a country newcomer. She was becoming a movement. With one foot still planted in Nashville and the other already stepping into pop culture, Taylor was walking a line most artists never cross. She was making country music that didn't just win awards. It defined a generation. And it all started with one album, Fearless. Taylor had already found early success with her debut, but Fearless was different. It wasn't just an album, it was a message to every girl who felt invisible, every teen who had loved the wrong person, every listener who wanted music that saw them. really saw them. Fearless was Taylor's first real attempt to expand beyond the country charts. She didn't abandon her roots, but she was dreaming bigger now. The lyrics still told stories, vivid, honest, diary style, but the melodies, they were bolder, more anthemic, more universal. And when she wrote Love Story, a modern Romeo and Juliet told through a teenager's eyes, she had no idea it would change everything. Love Story was more than a hit, it was a phenomenon. Radio stations played it on repeat. The music video exploded on MTV and CMT alike. You didn't have to like country music to like Taylor Swift anymore. She had crossed over without even trying. And the craziest part? She was still only 18. The success was staggering. Fearless debuted at number one. It broke streaming records. It stayed on the Billboard 200 longer than any female album in history up to that point. It was certified multi-platinum within months. And then came the tour. The Fearless Tour was Taylor's first major headlining experience. She didn't just perform, she created a storybook on stage. Fairy lights, floating balconies, dramatic dress changes, acoustic moments under a single spotlight. It wasn't just a concert, it was a confession, a dream, a love letter to her fans. And the fans responded in kind. They showed up in homemade shirts, with handwritten signs, singing every lyric back to her, word for word. She wasn't just a performer to them, she was a friend, someone who understood the ache of being young and hopeful and heartbroken. But with success came new pressures. The music industry started watching her with a different lens, not as a promising artist, but as a threat. She was outselling veterans, winning over critics, and perhaps most importantly, she was writing everything herself. Taylor wasn't a label puppet. She wasn't a manufactured act. She was a songwriter, a storyteller, and she was controlling her own narrative. That scared people because she wasn't just rising, she was redefining what it meant to be a female artist in her 20s. And not everyone liked that. In 2009, Taylor made history. She became the youngest artist ever to win Album of the Year at the Grammys for Fearless. She was standing on the industry's biggest stage, holding its biggest prize. And for a moment, it felt like the whole world was cheering her on. But that moment was short lived. Because that same year, Taylor's most infamous public moment happened. It was the MTV Video Music Awards. Taylor won Best Female Video for You Belong With Me. She walked on stage, stunned, holding her award. And then it happened. Kanye West took the mic. He interrupted her speech, told the audience that someone else deserved to win, left Taylor frozen in front of millions. The crowd booed, not just at Kanye, but at the situation. She stood there 19 years old, humiliated and confused. No one had prepared her for that. It wasn't just a moment of disrespect. It was a global media circus. And Taylor, for the first time, became part of a story she didn't control. But instead of breaking, she responded the only way she knew how. She wrote. Innocent was her answer. Not with anger, but grace. It wasn't petty. It wasn't vengeful. It was thoughtful, human, sad. She turned pain into poetry, awkwardness into art. And once again, fans saw themselves in her. because everyone knows what it feels like to be spoken over, to be dismissed, to be made small in a big moment. Taylor didn't lash out. She grew up on stage in front of everyone. What followed was a period of rapid transformation. She was touring constantly, doing press, writing nonstop. Her public image was evolving, still country, but also pop, still vulnerable, but now more poised, still young, but no longer naive. And in the background, she was watching, learning how the press worked, how narrative were built, how fame was a machine, one she'd need to understand if she wanted to survive. And that survival depended on two things: controlling her music, controlling her message. Fearless made her a star, but it also made her a target. Because when a young woman dares to take up space, to be emotional, outspoken, unfiltered, the world doesn't always know what to do with her. And Taylor, she was just getting started. Looking back, Fearless wasn't just a successful album, it was a blueprint, a signpost of what Taylor would become. Someone unafraid to speak from her heart, break industry molds, get knocked down and stand up again. Because what she proved with Fearless wasn't just that she could write hits, it was that she could build a world, one song at a time. And that world didn't belong to the critics, or the labels, or the haters. It belonged to the fans, to the girls crying in their bedrooms, to the boys afraid to show emotion, to the misfits, the overthinkers, the romantics. Taylor gave them a voice, and in doing so, she found her own. Fearless became a milestone in music, but more importantly, it became a mirror, one that showed a generation your feelings are real, your stories matter, your voice is enough. Taylor wasn't fearless because she had no fear. She was fearless because she spoke anyway. And that's what turned a country starlet into a global phenomenon. Segment 4: Speak Now. Finding her voice in a world that spoke over her. The world had spoken over her on national television, in news headlines, in online comment sections that never seemed to sleep. She had been labeled too young, too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. But now Taylor Swift was ready to speak on her own terms, and she wasn't waiting for permission. Her next album would be called Speak Now. But this wasn't just a title, it was a promise. After the massive success of Fearless, expectations were sky high. She had gone from writing songs in her bedroom to performing on the world's biggest stages. People wondered, could she do it again? Could she keep writing alone? Could she grow without losing who she was? Taylor didn't respond with interviews. She responded with work. She locked herself away and wrote every song on her next album solo. No co writers, no commercial formulas, no manufactured stories. Just her voice, unfiltered, unapologetic, untouchable. Because for Taylor, Speak Now was more than an album, it was a declaration of independence. Released in 2010, Speak Now marked a turning point. She was no longer the young girl breaking into Nashville. She was now a woman building her own world, note by note, lyric by lyric. And the songs, they weren't just personal, they were bold. Dear John wasn't a subtle metaphor. It was a 7-minute emotional reckoning, clear, raw, brave. She wasn't hiding names. She wasn't softening blows. She was telling the truth, even when it hurt, even when it made people uncomfortable, because the world had spoken over her for long enough. Now she was owning the narrative. Each track on Speak Now reflected a different moment in Taylor's evolution. Back to December was an apology, rare, vulnerable, adult. Mean was a clapback to critics who called her weak. Enchanted captured the fantasy of hope. The story of us echoed the heartbreak of growing apart, even in public. And the title track, Speak Now, was about interrupting a wedding to say what should have been said. It was romantic. Yes, but metaphorically, it was everything Taylor had felt for years. That moment before the doors close, that final chance to say something when everyone tells you to stay quiet. She wasn't staying quiet anymore. The world was changing. So was Taylor. She was still writing, still about love. But now her songs had sharper edges. They cut deeper. She was beginning to realize that telling the truth, her truth, wasn't just powerful, it was necessary. And it wasn't always going to be popular. During this era, the media began to shift in tone. Taylor was no longer just the golden girl. They started painting her as boy crazy, as someone who couldn't hold a relationship, as someone whose songs were just revenge wrapped in a melody. But those critiques missed the point entirely. Taylor wasn't obsessed with boys. She was obsessed with being honest about human emotion. And while the world wanted her to sing about love in a way that was quiet, passive, acceptable, she was writing about it honestly, messily, and loudly. Because heartbreak isn't polite. It's loud. It's complicated. It doesn't follow a formula. And neither did she. Speak Now debuted at #1 on the Billboard charts. It sold over 1 million copies in its first week. It broke records again. But more importantly, it silenced critics who said she couldn't write alone. She had done exactly that and produced one of the most emotionally complex albums of her generation. At just 20 years old, Taylor had become the most awarded female country artist of the year, and yet she still wasn't taken seriously by many in the industry. Why? Because she was young, because she was a woman, because she was emotional. But if Speak Now proved anything, it was this: emotion is not a weakness, it's a superpower. The Speak Now World Tour was theatrical, magical, and personal. Every performance was like a diary come to life. She opened with Sparks Fly, flying through the air on wires. She sang Back to December in falling snow. She delivered Mean, dressed like a vintage storyteller in a rocking chair. It wasn't just spectacle, it was storytelling at its highest form. And for fans, especially young women, it was transformative because they didn't just hear themselves in her songs, they saw a version of who they could become. Someone who felt everything deeply and used it to create something beautiful. Someone who didn't apologize for caring, for dreaming, for loving too much, for speaking now. This era also marked Taylor's first experiments with transformation. Her look became more refined. Her voice matured. Her performances carried more theatrical weight. She was stepping into adulthood and doing it without a blueprint. There was no rule book for what she was building. There was no path laid out. because she wasn't following one, she was making it. But the louder she got, the more pushback she received, not from her fans, from the culture. Late night hosts made jokes about her dating life. Bloggers called her clingy. Critics called her lyrics juvenile. But every time someone tried to reduce her, she answered with a new song, a new story, a new sound. And Speak Now became the moment she stepped out of the box the industry had tried to put her in. No longer just a country star, no longer a novelty, no longer someone to pat on the head. She was now a writer, a businesswoman, a force, and the world was beginning to realize she wasn't going anywhere. Years later, when Taylor began re recording her early work to reclaim ownership of her masters, Speak Now, Taylor's version, hit differently. Fans realized just how powerful those songs were, just how ahead of her time she'd been, because Speak Now was never just about a wedding. It was about a moment, any moment, where silence is expected, and the courage it takes to speak anyway. Taylor had done just that. And in doing so, she gave millions permission to do the same. By the end of the Speak Now era, Taylor Swift had made something crystal clear. She didn't need a co writer. She didn't need approval. She didn't need validation. She had her voice, and she was done letting the world talk over it. In fact, she was just warming up because next she would do the unthinkable. She would leave country behind and write an album that would change pop music forever. Segment 5, Red, When Love Became Art and Art Became War. Some emotions don't fit into neat categories. They're not black, they're not white, they're red. That's how Taylor Swift described it. Red is the color of love that's burning too fast, of passion that leaves scars, of heartbreak that feels like fire. And in 2012, Red would become more than just the title of her next album. It would become the moment she stepped off the familiar road and walked into the wild unknown. After the success of Speak Now, Taylor had nothing left to prove, but everything left to explore. She'd mastered country storytelling. She'd silenced her critics. She had sold out arenas and topped charts. But now, she wanted to experiment. She wanted to push boundaries, blend genres, say things she'd never dared to say before. And she wanted to show the world what love really felt like, in all its chaos and contradiction. So she started writing. But this time, she didn't go it alone. Taylor brought in new collaborators: Max Martin, Shellback, Gary Lightbody, Ed Sheeran. Names that didn't belong to country music. Names from the pop and alt rock worlds. It was controversial. To some, it looked like Taylor was leaving country behind. To her, she wasn't leaving anything. She was growing. She was building a sound that reflected the emotional messiness of life in your 20s, when nothing makes sense and everything feels like it matters too much. And out of that chaos came Red. Red was a kaleidoscope of feeling. One moment, it was pop perfection, like 22, carefree and glittery. The next, it was raw and stripped, like All Too Well, a 5-minute descent into memory and loss. Critics didn't know what to call it. Was it country? Was it pop? Was it both? Was it neither? But fans didn't care. because what they heard was truth. Real, gut wrenching, messy truth. Taylor had always been honest, but on Red, she was reckless in her honesty and beautiful in it. The lead single, We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together, was catchy, snarky, addictive. It went straight to number one, her first Billboard Hot 100 topper. Suddenly, Taylor Swift was no longer just that country girl who writes sad songs. She was becoming a pop juggernaut, whether the industry was ready or not. But it was all too well that would become the soul of the album. It wasn't the biggest radio hit, but it was the most loved. A 5-minute ballad tucked deep into the track list that felt like opening someone's diary and reading a chapter they didn't want anyone to see. You call me up again just to break me like a promise. So casually cruel in the name of being honest. Those lines didn't just hit, they haunted. Fans memorized every word, sang it like a hymn, cried to it in the dark, and a decade, and a later it would grow into something even bigger. But in 2012, it was already a masterclass. A heartbreak so vividly drawn, it became legend. Still, with every success came more scrutiny. The media narrative sharpened. She was dating actors, musicians, celebrities, and every breakup became tabloid bait. Late night shows mocked her, memes multiplied. The message was loud. She writes too many songs about her exes, but they missed the point. She wasn't just writing about them, she was writing about herself, her growth, her shame, her regrets, her healing. And more importantly, she was writing for millions of people who had felt those same things but didn't know how to say them. Taylor gave them the words, and in doing so, she became more than just a performer. She became a mirror. During the Red Tour, Taylor embraced spectacle like never before. The visuals were bigger, the costumes more dramatic, the staging more theatrical. But in between the glitter and lights, she kept returning to her guitar, to the piano, to her stories. She'd stop the show and talk directly to the audience. She'd say things like, This is for anyone who's ever loved the wrong person too deeply. This is for anyone who got ghosted and still checks their phone. And every time the arena would erupt, not just in screams, but in recognition. Taylor wasn't perfect. She never claimed to be. She made choices that sparked debate. She clapped back at critics. She wore her heart and her heartbreak day on her sleeve. And that honesty, it made people uncomfortable, especially because she was a young woman doing it loudly without shame. But that's what Red was about. Not just romantic love, but the love of self, even when it's complicated, even when it's unpopular, even when the world says you're doing it wrong. By the end of the Red era, Taylor was at a crossroads. She'd just released her most sonically daring album. She'd won praise from Rolling Stone, Time, Billboard. She'd proven she could survive and thrive outside of Nashville. But she was also tired of being underestimated, of being mischaracterized, of being laughed at for feeling too much. She wanted a clean slate, not just musically, publicly, personally, professionally. She wanted to burn down the image people had built for her and build a new one herself. In 2014, Taylor made the boldest move of her career. She officially left country music and announced a fully pop album. It was a risk. She could lose her bass, she could fall flat, she could fade into pop anonymity. But Taylor wasn't afraid. Because if Red taught her anything, it was that she could survive heartbreak, even if the heartbreak came from the world itself. Years later, Taylor would re record Red as part of reclaiming her master rights. And this time, she released All Too Well, 10-minute version. It debuted at number one. It shattered records. It became her most critically acclaimed song ever. And it wasn't just because it was longer, it was because it was unfiltered, a full heartbreak, with every jagged edge, every flashback, every ache. The same girl who had once been mocked for too many breakup songs was now celebrated as one of the greatest lyricists of her generation. That's the irony of Red. At the time, it was viewed as transitional. Too pop for country, too country for pop. But in hindsight, Red was the album where Taylor Swift became timeless. Not because it was perfect, but because it wasn't. Because it captured what life really feels like in your 20s: beautiful, messy, intense, unfinished, just like the color red. Segment 6, 1989, The Pop Crown and the Price of Perfection. In the fall of 2014, a sound was changing. Less banjo, more bass, less diary entries, more neon synths. And in the center of it all stood Taylor Swift. She had already conquered country. She had already reshaped pop with Red. But now she was ready to make it official. This wasn't a transition, it was a statement, a coronation. "Welcome to New York," she sang. "It's been waiting for you." And when 1989 dropped, the world realized something. Taylor Swift wasn't just chasing pop perfection, she was defining it. 1989 wasn't just an album, it was an era. Named after the year she was born, it was the sound of reinvention. Every beat felt like a city skyline at night. Every lyric, a post it note from a sleepless 20 something still searching for clarity. But behind the glossy hooks and shimmering synths, there was a deeper truth. Taylor had never been more in control and never under more pressure. Because when you wear the crown, the whole world watches for you to fall. Let's rewind. After Red, Taylor was exhausted. She had poured her soul into a genre that no longer felt like home. She had faced relentless tabloid pressure, industry snubs, and late night punchlines. And as she stood in the edge of her next chapter, she knew two things. She wanted to change everything. She didn't want to apologize for it. So she studied. She read. She listened to Robin, Annie Lennox, Peter Gabriel, Bleachers. She immersed herself in 80s pop, not just sonically, but spiritually. Big choruses, bright lights, unapologetic energy. And then she began to write. Unlike Red, which was emotionally messy and genre defiant, 1989 was sharp, clean, and laser focused. It was her first album where every track was crafted to fit one idea: pop without fear. No acoustic ballads, no twang, no backup plans. It was a leap, and she made it in heels. The first single, Shake It Off, was an eat, full throttle rejection of criticism. Haters gonna hate, hate, hate. It was catchy, carefree, impossible to ignore. And while some rolled their eyes, Millions turned it up. But 1989 wasn't just dance anthems. It had depth. Out of the Woods captured anxiety like thunder in a bottle. Clean was the quiet ache after chaos. Style was sleek and bittersweet. Blank Space, oh, Blank Space, was satire at its sharpest. Taylor had been mocked for dating too much, writing too many breakup songs. So she flipped the script. Got a long list of ex lovers, they'll tell you I'm insane. It was camp. It was commentary. It was brilliant. She turned the caricature the media made of her into a costume she wore better than anyone else. The reception? Massive. 1989 debuted at number one. It sold 1.287 million copies in its first week, in an era when no one was buying albums. She was the only artist to go platinum that year. And when the Grammys came, she made history. Again, she won Album of the Year, becoming the first woman in history to win that award twice as a lead artist. But with the crown came consequences. Suddenly, Taylor was everywhere. Fashion magazines, news headlines, red carpets, friend groups branded the squad. She was a role model, a cultural force, a businesswoman. But beneath the confidence was something fragile. Because 1989 didn't just lift her to the top of the world, it isolated her. She couldn't go out without bodyguards. She couldn't make mistakes without viral backlash. She couldn't post, date, speak, or even stay silent without criticism. She had become an icon. But at what cost? There's a danger in perfection. When everything you do looks flawless, people stop seeing the person underneath. And Taylor began to feel that. The girl who once wrote in notebooks on her bedroom floor now had her every word dissected by millions. And for every fan who sang her lyrics, there was someone online waiting to twist them into something cruel. But Taylor didn't retreat. She leaned in. She used her platform to champion other artists, to call out double standards in the industry, to fight for streaming rights, to speak up for women in music. And yet, criticism kept coming. She's too calculated. She plays the victim. She's fake. The narrative tightened. People weren't just watching Taylor, they were waiting for her to stumble. And in 2016, she did. It started with Kanye West. Again, his song Famous used a line about Taylor that was explicit and degrading. Taylor objected. Kanye and his wife, Kim Kardashian, claimed she had approved it. A phone call clip was released, edited out of context, but damaging. The internet turned. Taylor Swift Eyes Over Party trended worldwide. She was branded a snake, a liar, a manipulator. And for the first time in her career, Taylor went completely silent. No interviews, no public appearances, no explanations. Just gone. Because when you've built your identity around being perfect and the world decides to reject you, it feels like erasure. But this wasn't the end. It was the crack before the reinvention. Because 1989 wasn't just the peak of Taylor's pop career, it was the turning point, where she realized that no matter how carefully you build your image, someone else will always try to take it apart. And if you let them, you'll lose everything. But if you don't, you might just lose yourself. Years later, Fans would look back on the 1989 era with a mix of nostalgia and awe. It was Taylor at her most glamorous, her most ambitious, her most exposed. But it was also the last time she would try to be everything for everyone, because perfection is a prison, and Taylor was ready to break out. With 1989, Taylor Swift wore the pop crown. But what she learned is that being a queen isn't about staying flawless. It's about knowing when to walk away from the throne and prepare for war. Segment 7: Reputation. The fall, the fury, the fight back first. They crowned her. Then they buried her. And while the world danced on the ashes of her reputation, Taylor Swift did something unexpected. She started rebuilding, but not to be loved again, to be free. This was no comeback, it was a reckoning. Welcome to the era where Taylor Swift stopped explaining and started fighting back. It began with silence. In 2016, Taylor disappeared from the spotlight. No press, no Instagram captions, no cryptic Tumblr posts, just silence. To the outside world, it looked like she was hiding. To the inside world, it felt like she was gone. Because after a decade of stardom, a single edited video had flipped her world upside down. She was called fake, calculated, a manipulator, and the world believed it. The headlines weren't just mean, they were surgical. Late night jokes, snake emojis, an entire internet culture rooted in her humiliation. Taylor Swift is over party trended worldwide, and no one defended her. Not the friends she once brought on stage, not the media who once praised her albums, not even the industry she helped build. It was a public takedown, and she was expected to quietly fade away. But Taylor Swift doesn't disappear. She waits, and when the time is right, she reclaims the mic. On August 21st, 2017, Taylor's social media accounts posted a cryptic video, no caption, just a slithering snake. Then another, then another. The woman they called a snake, she'd become one, not in shame, in power. Because if the world insists you're the villain, you might as well tell the best villain origin story ever written. And that story would be called Reputation. Gone were the soft colors, the romantic ballads, the humble girl next door image. This was steel, black lipstick, electric beats, and lyrics sharper than any headline. The first single, Look What You Made Me Do, didn't whisper, it roared. I'm sorry, the old Taylor can't come to the phone right now. Why? Oh, because she's dead. It was bold, theatrical, vengeful, and it hit like a lightning strike. Reputation wasn't created to win back love, it was built to stand on its own, loved or not. Taylor worked in secrecy, refusing interviews. She didn't explain the album. She didn't ask for empathy. She made it. She owned it. She dropped it like a declaration of war. And when Reputation landed, the numbers spoke for themselves. Over 1.2 million copies sold in its first week. Number one in 13 countries. A global juggernaut. And she did it with zero traditional press. No promo tour. No morning shows. No late night appearances. Just one woman standing in the wreckage of her public image and building a castle on top of it. But behind the venom and vengeance, there was something deeper: love. Buried within the bass drops and dark eyeliner were songs that showed something no scandal could erase. Taylor Swift was in love. Delicate was a whisper in a world of shouts. New Year's Day was a gentle piano ballad, holding someone's hand not on the party night, but the morning after. This wasn't a breakup album. It was a love letter written during a war. Because while the world attacked her identity, Taylor found safety in something real, in someone who saw her for who she truly was. And that changed everything. The Reputation Stadium tour broke records. It became the highest grossing US tour of all time. But it wasn't just a concert, it was a statement. Taylor strutted across massive stages in a leather bodysuit, surrounded by snakes the size of buildings. And in the middle of it all, she stopped, sat at a piano, and told thousands of people, I learned that people can go from cheering for you to not wanting you to exist anymore. And I wanted to show you that it's possible to come back. The crowd screamed, but not just out of excitement, out of recognition, because everyone knows what it's like to be misjudged, to be taken down, to feel like your story has been rewritten without your permission. Taylor took that pain and turned it into a production so defiant, it left no doubt she wasn't ruined. She was reborn. But the Reputation era wasn't just about fire. It was about forgiveness, not for others, for herself, for trusting the wrong people, for believing the world would protect her, for thinking vulnerability was safe. And with that forgiveness came something Taylor hadn't shown in years: joy. Because once you've been canceled, once the world's turned its back on you, once you've been mocked, memed, and minimized, and you survive, there's freedom in that. Freedom to stop performing, freedom to stop pleasing, freedom to start over. And that's exactly what Reputation gave her. When the era ended, she didn't linger. She didn't beg the world to love her again. She simply walked away, ready for a softer world, ready for color again, ready for lover. But she wouldn't have made it there without Reputation, because Reputation was her armor, her shelter, her fire. The era where she didn't just rebuild her career, she reclaimed her name. Segment 8: Lover, Loss, and the Woman Who Wrote Her Own Legacy. After the storm comes the stillness, after the fury, the light, and for Taylor Swift, after Reputation came Lover. Gone were the snakes, gone was the leather armor, gone was the silence. In their place, color, confetti, a pink painted door to a new beginning. But this wasn't a return to innocence. It was a woman stepping into her power, not to fight anymore, but to create. When Taylor released Lover in 2019, it wasn't with vengeance. It was with vulnerability, with joy, with a wink. I want to be defined by the things I love, she said, not the things I hate, not the things I'm afraid of. This album wasn't about proving herself. It was about owning herself. From the title track's gentle devotion to the political defiance of You Need to Calm Down, to the confessional ache of the archer, Lover was personal, not because it hurt, but because it healed. She was finally creating from a place of peace, not chasing charts, not clapping back, just being. It was a version of Taylor Swift the world hadn't met before. Calm, grounded, soft without being fragile, strong without being hardened. She had found something rare, emotional clarity, and she was writing from it. But just as this new chapter was unfolding, the world changed. 2020 arrived. A global pandemic, lockdowns, silence, concerts stopped, tours canceled, plans fell apart. But Taylor didn't. She turned inward again, not out of fear, out of instinct. And in that stillness, she began to write. What came next was not expected. No promo, no countdown, no Instagram clues. Just a surprise announcement. Tonight at midnight, I'll be releasing my eighth studio album, Folklore. It wasn't pop. It wasn't country. It wasn't radio ready. It was a literary world, a quiet forest of characters, memories, and moods. She collaborated with Aaron Dessner of The National and longtime friend Jack Antonoff. She sang about ghosts, affairs, imaginary lives, unspoken regrets. She whispered instead of belting, and it landed like a meteor. Folklore shattered records. It debuted at number one. It became the most streamed album by a female artist in 24 hours on Spotify. Critics hailed it as her finest work yet. Because this time, she wasn't telling just her story. She was telling everyone's. The stillness of lockdown gave her space to experiment. And what emerged was a masterpiece. Followed months later by Evermore, a sister album, deeper in the woods, more haunted, more poetic. Two albums in 5 months, written in secret, released without fanfare. Because when the noise fades, all that's left is the music. And for Taylor, that was enough. But behind the scenes, a battle had been brewing, a fight for something far more personal than chart placement, a fight for her work, her masters. The original recordings of her first six albums had been sold without her consent. It was a gut punch, a business deal that dismissed her art and her autonomy. But Taylor didn't beg to get them back. She did something no pop star had ever done at her level. She started re recording them, note for note, lyric for lyric, but this time owned by her. It was bold, legal, personal, and fans responded. Fearless, Taylor's version. Red, Taylor's version. Speak Now, Taylor's version. 1989, Taylor's version. Each one a declaration. You can't take what I built because I can build it again, even stronger. Meanwhile, Taylor was growing into something bigger than even her songs, a cultural force, a business icon, a feminist voice, a political activist. She endorsed causes, spoke out on LGBTQ plus rights, fought for artists' streaming royalties, testified in court about her own assault, and won. She wasn't just writing lyrics anymore, she was writing history. And then came Midnights, her 2022 return to synth pop storytelling, an introspective, moody, late night confessional of an album. She explored self loathing, revenge fantasies, insecurities, and dreams. Songs like Anti Hero revealed her deepest doubts. It's me, hi, I'm the problem, it's me. A lyric that turned into a cultural moment, a meme, a mirror. Because Taylor was no longer writing from the outside looking in. She was writing from within, with honesty, humor, and zero fear. And then came the Eras Tour, a 3-hour, 45-song journey through every era of her career. Each chapter, a different self. Each costume, a different evolution. Each night, a shared memory for tens of thousands of fans. The tour wasn't just a concert, it was a museum of a legacy in real time. A legacy she built, she protected, she redefined. Night after night, city after city, Taylor reminded the world she wasn't just a singer, she was a storyteller of our generation. And maybe that's the secret. From a Christmas tree farm in Pennsylvania to record breaking stadiums, from whispered lyrics to loud political stances, from heartbreak to healing, from being silenced to speaking now. Taylor Swift didn't wait to be remembered. She wrote her way into legacy, one line at a time, one album at a time, one reinvention at a time. Today, her name is more than fame. It's resilience, it's evolution, it's art. She took every rumor, insult, and setback and turned them into verses. She turned public scrutiny into private growth. She turned pain into poetry. She turned her own name into a movement. Taylor Swift isn't just surviving the music industry, she's rewriting it. Not for applause, not for revenge, but for every girl who's ever been underestimated, dismissed, silenced, stolen from, laughed at. She turned their stories and hers into something unforgettable because she knows legacies aren't given, they're written. And Taylor Swift wrote hers in ink, not pencil.